Welcome to the first of 3 video lectures on Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. In this first video lecture, I'm going to take about 10 minutes and introduce Greek epic, just a broad overview of Homer's poems, two epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, just a broad strokes. Then I'm going to take about 15 minutes or so and introduce book 1 of the Iliad. And then I'm going to take about 15 minutes more and introduce book 3 of the Iliad. We'll gloss over very quickly book 2. So in total, this first video will be about 40 minutes. In the second videos, I will then move on and look at books 6 and 16 in the second video. And then introduce and discuss books 22 and 24 in the third video lecture. So in total, we're only looking at, in depth, at 6 books of the Iliad. And I'm asking you to read those 6 books. But it's important to know there are 24 books to the Iliad, and don't be intimidated by the word book. It might be easier to think of it in your mind as a chapter. So we have the Iliad has 24 chapters, but when we're talking about Greek epic, we call them books. So there's book 1, book 2, book 3, but they're not whole books by themselves. Each book is maybe somewhere between 10 and 15 pages worth of text, right? So much more like our modern notion of a chapter. All right, let's begin then with this first video lecture. I've got learning objectives for us, so there are some key things that I want you to be able to do by the end of the video lecture. So number 1, students will be able to describe key characteristics of Homer's epic poetry. So I'm going to go over those at the beginning of this video. Students will be able to recall, so when we get to class and when we take the quiz, I want you to remember the cause of the Trojan War and be able to describe key characteristics. So those will appear on the practice quiz that comes after this video lecture, and they will appear on the graded quiz that we do in class as well. Students will be able to define a proem and analyze the opening proem of Homer's Iliad. Notice that's not poem, it's proem. And I will open up our discussion of book 1 of the Iliad with a discussion of what a proem is, and we will look at that opening proem, those opening lines of Homer's Iliad. Number 4, students will be able to define and analyze Greek notions of time and kleos. So over the course of our study, I'm going to introduce some different Greek words and concepts, and in this one we're going to talk about 2 different ideas of glory, time and kleos. So we'll dive into what those 2 words mean, both what they mean but also the idea that they represent. Number 5, students will be able to identify and analyze Homeric similes. So when we get to our discussion of book 3, I'm going to point out 4 different Homeric similes. We'll read those together and analyze those similes, and then I want you to be able to do that on your own, identify and find more of those, and analyze them. And last, number 6, students will recall key characters, events, and themes from books 1 and 3 of Homer's Iliad. And there are a lot of characters and events, and I'll emphasize the idea of key characters. So we're gonna narrow it down to the most important ones, but there are still a lot of important characters. Okay, let me go ahead then and jump into then our discussion of Greek epic poetry, and I'm going to take about 6 more minutes or so and go over Greek epic poetry, broad strokes. What are we talking about when we talk about the Greek epic poems, right? There's really only 2. There probably were more. We know there were probably some shorter ones, but there's only, for our purposes, we're only ever going to talk about 2, and really there's only 2 that exist. To talk about the others early is to get into the minutia. They're lost, they're short. We don't have them anymore anyway. There are 2 epic poems that Homer is considered the author of. There is the Iliad, which is what we're starting our study with, and we're going to read those 6 books of the Iliad that I talked about earlier, 6 books. And then we're going to talk next about Odyssey later in the class. In the Odyssey, we're going to look at 4 books of the Odyssey. Now, keep in mind, like the Iliad, the Odyssey also has 24 books. So there are 2 epic poems. Each of them have 24 books. Make sure, remember that. Tuck that away. Homer has 2 epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and each one has 24 books. The Iliad is the story of Troy. Ilium is the name of a city. There's everything. It feels like everything in mythology gets 2 names, right? There's Zeus is the Greek name, and Jupiter is the Roman name, right? Lots of we get 2 names for everything, right? So Troy gets 2 names. The Trojan War is the war in Troy, and it's often called. It's also called Ilium. It gets both names, and the word Iliad, the name of our first epic poem, comes from the other name of Troy. So the Iliad is the story of Troy. The Odyssey is a little bit different. It's about the character Odysseus, and it's the story of Odysseus. So I think we could say that the Iliad is the story of Troy, specifically and mostly about the Achilles, which is a little bit confusing. I think sometimes it's easy to think you hear Iliad and hear Ili like Achilles. But in some ways that works, because it is very much a story about the character named Achilles. And really there's 2 major characters that we're going to start off talking about, and then it expands widely from there. But 2 main characters we'll start off with, Agamemnon and Achilles. Alright, so I said in my first learning objective you need to know the basics of Greek epic poetry. So now there's this guy named Homer. It said that he wrote 2 big long epic poems. Each one has 24 books, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad's about Ilium, or about Troy, and Achilles. The Odyssey is mostly about Odysseus and his travels and his journey home. All right, both poems center on the Trojan War. Okay, the Trojan War is a war that it's legendary, not historical. So that means, did it happen? Right? Is sort of the fun question to ask. Was there really a Trojan War? Was there really an Achilles? Was there really an Odysseus? Probably not. These are the things of legend, sort of like King Arthur or Robin Hood, right? These are legendary characters, and there may have been somebody who the legend grew from, an historical figure, but well, we can't know. And it's a fun question to talk about and think about, but in the end, we can't really know. These are legendary characters, Odysseus and Achilles, right? Okay, so there's this and the war, the Trojan War, is the stuff of legend as well, not history. Now, within that, though, we can kind of date it just a little bit. If it did happen, whatever did happen, it was the 12th century BCE. So to have some context, we are in the 21st century AD. So you have to go back in time 21 centuries and then 12 more. So we're talking about something that happened well over 3,000 years ago. And this was a time before writing as well. So when we're talking about epic poetry, we are talking about an oral tradition. These were stories that were passed down orally from bard to bard, from poet to poet, orally. And a bard would memorize the story, and they were sung, not just simply stated. And they were not just stated, and they were not just read. There was a musical element, and we don't have the musical element. We've lost the music that goes with it, so we can't quite sing along anymore. But we have the words, right? Because eventually writing does come along, and people remember the stories. The people who had memorized the Iliad and the Odyssey, and eventually it gets written down. Right? Okay, back to the Trojan War. So the Trojan War happens in the 12th century BCE, over 3,000 years ago, and it lasts for 10 years. And this is important. The war itself lasts for 10 years, but the Iliad, which is about Ilium, about Troy and the Trojan War, we only get that only takes place in a very small part of year 9 of the war. So near the end. But the Iliad does not go all the way to the end. So we don't get to see the Trojan horse, the famous Trojan horse story where Odysseus comes up with the idea of the hollow horse, and you've probably heard of that, right? We don't get that in the Iliad. It doesn't go that far. It doesn't go all the way to the end. So it starts in the middle of year 9, and it goes for probably a couple of months, and that's the Iliad. 24 books, just about that part of the war. The Odyssey, on the other hand, it takes 10 years of time, but it doesn't happen during the Trojan War. It's about the 10 years after, and it's about all the struggles and the adventures that Odysseus has trying to get home from the Trojan War. When we get to our study of when we get to our study of the Odyssey, I'm going to introduce a word called nostos, N-O-S-T-O-S. That's for a future video lecture, so I'm off on a tangent just a moment. But nostos means homecoming, and that's what the Odyssey is about. Not the Iliad, though. The Iliad very much happens in Ilium, in Troy, or at least in the land surrounding Troy, and it's about the Trojan War. Okay, so those are the key things, learning objective number 1, that I want you to know about Greek epic poetry. Learning objective number 2, I want you to know how the war started, or at least according to legend, how it started. So we've got a king named Menelaus. He's got a brother named Agamemnon. We're going to hear lots about these two brothers. They're each kings, right? And Menelaus has a wife named Helen. And when Helen is the most beautiful woman in the world. She is a daughter of Zeus, the most beautiful woman in the world, and everyone wanted to marry her. Well, along comes a guy named Paris, and he's from Troy. So on one side of the sea, we have the Greeks and all the different Greek kings, which are Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus. Don't worry if all the names seem hard at first. You'll get them. Those are some of the big ones to know. And then there's lots more kings. And they all get together. Now, these are not kings in a big sense. Like, they don't have huge kingdoms. Some of them have just very tiny kingdoms. But they come together and bring all their kingdoms together as the Greeks to go off and fight Troy. And Troy has a prince named Paris. And Paris is a prince of Troy. He's the second-born son after Hector. So over on this side, we've got Hector and Paris. And Paris comes along. He visits Menelaus, and he steals the most beautiful woman in the world. He steals Helen as his wife. And it's not clear if Helen wanted to be stolen or not. And in Menelaus' mind, it doesn't matter. He gets all of the Greek kings together, and they had all promised that they would come to his aid if ever Helen was stolen from him, and alas, she is, and they all sail for Troy. So the cause of the Trojan War, at least in legend, right, the legendary cause is Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. All right, let's move on to our next learning objectives, and actually let's move into book 1 of the Iliad. So next up, I want to talk about what a proem is, right? In a proem, so here we've got the text of the Iliad, and a proem is an opening prayer to a goddess, to a muse specifically, for help telling the story. So let's read the first lines of the Iliad together. Follow along with me, and also too, the idea of these video lectures is that you have read books 1 and 3 before you listen to the video lecture. So if you've not done that yet, pause here and take about 45 minutes and go back and read books 1 and 3 and then come back to the video lecture. The idea is that the video, you read first, then the video lecture. So if you haven't done that, pause now, read, and then come back to this point. All right, but let's go back now and let's look at those opening lines together. The proem. Goddess, sing of the cataclysmic wrath of great Achilles, son of Peleus, which caused the Greeks immeasurable pain, and sent so many noble souls of heroes to Hades, the underworld is Hades, and made men the spoils of dogs, a banquet for the birds, and so the plan of Zeus unfolded. Starting with the conflict, so remember Homer, is asking the goddess, or the muse, our note tells us is most likely Calliope, the muse who inspires epic poetry, and help me tell this story. So in our writing assignment, our weekly writing assignment, which will come this weekend, I'm going to give everyone a couple of choices to write. And one of the choices you'll have to write will be to do a creative option where you write your own proem. So there'll be more on that later. But I want everyone to have a very clear idea of what a proem is and how epic poetry starts with a proem. And this one's important too. When we get to the Odyssey, we'll see a different kind of proem. but this is Sing Me a Song About Wrath. Achilles is an angry man, to put it mildly. If he's a half god, he's a demigod. If he were a god, I think he'd be the god of rage, as we'll see, right? But the proem not only asks for help from a muse to sing the song, to tell the story, but it also sets a tone for the epic poem. And this is going to be a poem about wrath, right? Immeasurable pain, souls being sent to Hades, right? But it's also the plan of Zeus. And it starts with the conflict between great Agamemnon and glorious Achilles. And if there's going to be lots of names, the two most important names to know in book 1, Achilles and Agamemnon. Those are the two most important ones, right? So here's the story, right? As you've been reading, Agamemnon has a trophy, a woman that he has won in battle. And I know we are going to come back and talk about this in a little bit more depth later, the way that women are treated in Greek literature. That's going to be an important topic that we keep coming back to. Women are not treated well, and especially women who are on the losing side of a war. Even though they have nothing to do with the war itself, with the fighting of the war, the women get the worst of it. And that's going to be a theme that's going to keep coming from the very beginning of this class through to the end, right? So Agamemnon has a prize that he has won, a woman that he has won, a young woman named Chryseis. And her father's name, this is a little bit confusing, her father's name is Chrysis, or Chryses. And he is one of Apollo's priests. And Agamemnon has treated him with disrespect. So in a battle, so I've got the little map over here. This is not included in the book, but it's in the PDF. Oh, by the way, just another tangent real quick. So our textbook, so if you're reading from the textbook, you've got this book. You're reading from this book. And it has some books of the Iliad, all the ones that you'll need for this class, but it doesn't have all 24. If you want to see all 24 books, you can check out a copy from the library or buy a copy on Amazon. This is Emily Watson's full, all 24 books. So you'll see in the video lectures I'll often have this at my side. So I'm looking at some of the other books as well that aren't included in our textbook. I'll also point out, while I'm on this tangent, there's other translations. So I've got them next to me as I'm getting ready, was getting ready to record here today. So Robert Fagel's is a really clean translation, really easy to follow and understand. I mean, none of these are easy. I'm not going to say they're easy, but this is the language is written in a way that makes sense and is more approachable, perhaps than some other translations. So, for example, like we've got Robert Fitzgerald, who is an older translation, and perhaps a little bit harder, maybe, right? And then another translation. This is the translation. This is actually my oldest version of the Iliad. This was from when I was an undergraduate, first studying Greek literature. So remember, none of this was ever written originally in English. It was all written in ancient Greek, and it wasn't even written at first, because remember I talked about that idea of an oral tradition. All right, done with my tangent. Let's get back to book 1. Right? Agamemnon has treated Chryses with disrespect, because he will not return Chryses' daughter to him, even though he asks. So let's look at these lines. Agamemnon treated Chryses, Apollo's priest, with disrespect. This priest had come towards the swift Greek ships and faced the warriors bedecked in bronze to free his daughter with a countless ransom. And according to Greek ethics, morality, Agamemnon should have accepted the ransom and freed the daughter, but he refused. And he says down, let's go down. He's he is treating him with disrespect. Be off with you, old man. And he says, okay, wait. I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit with Agamemnon's reaction. First, I just want to point out what happens when he disrespects him, right? And the first thing that happens, so Chryses goes back to his homeland, which is his little city is called Chryse, and in Chryse he's an ally to the Trojans. Hence, and I go back to my little map here. And you can't see, but Chryse would actually be, his little temple would be down lower on the map that I've included here. This is the map of where Achilles' camp is, where Odysseus's camp is, where Ajax's camp is, and somewhere in the middle would be Agamemnon's. It doesn't show on this map. And then they've built their camps here, and then the city of Troy, with all of its walls around it, is very well fortified over here. And so the the Greeks had been off, and they'd been pillaging various places, and one of the things they pillaged was Chryse, and had stolen had pillaged and taken his daughter with them. So he goes back, and he prays to Apollo, the god. Apollo is the god of several things, but one of the things he's the god of is plague. And he says, bring down plague on the Greeks. And he does. This was his prayer, and Phoebus, everyone gets several names. Phoebus is part of Apollo's name, so when you ever see Phoebus, it just means Apollo. Heeded him. Enraged at heart, he, Apollo, swooped down from the peaks of Mount Olympus, bearing on his shoulders his quiver and his bow. He's also the god of archery, so he's very good at shooting things. But in this case, the quiver, the arrows, have plague at the end of them. And as he moved in rage, his arrows clattered on his back. Like night, the god descended. Then he set a distance from the ships, the Greek ships, and started shooting. His silver bow let out a dreadful howl. First he attacked the mules and nimble dogs, then turned his piercing weapon on the men. And pyres were always burning, piled with corpses. For 9 long days he shoots these arrows, right? Until finally Achilles says, our people are sick, our men are sick, our army is sick. What do we do? And it's Achilles then who steps up and says, we've got to do something. And he talks with Calchas. There's a council, and Calchas is called upon. Now he is the prophet or the seer on the Greek side. There's lots of seers, right? People who can understand what the gods are doing and thinking. And they ask Calchas, what's going on? And Calchas, he figures it out, right? He's able to figure it out. He says, Apollo is mad because of the way Agamemnon treated his priest. And it's got to get fixed. And Agamemnon is not happy with this. Agamemnon is furious that he might have to lose Chryseis. And I think this is telling, right? You claim that Archer laid this pain on us because I did not want to take the ransom. I want the girl Chryseis in my home. I like her more than my own Clytemnestra, my wife. Agamemnon likes Chryseis more than his own wife back at home, right? But he says, I'm prepared to give her back if that is best. I want the army safe, not dead. But he insists, if I have to give my trophy back, then someone has to give me theirs. And he's going to end up calling on Achilles to give up his trophy, which is a woman named Briseis. And those names sound confusing, so maybe just remember that the C, Chryseis, is Agamemnon's, and B, Briseis, is Achilles' trophy. And Agamemnon gets it back. And this is the quarrel, the argument between Agamemnon and Achilles. That's the stuff of book 1. And the whole rest of the Iliad as well. This is the driving force, because Achilles is so angry. And Achilles is by far the best of the Greek warriors. He's a better warrior than Agamemnon. He doesn't have more political power. He's not the commander of the army. But in a fight, nobody can beat Achilles. He is the greatest warrior. Maybe Hercules. But Hercules isn't around during the Trojan War. That's a different time period, right? Achilles is the great Greek warrior, the epitome of what it means to be a warrior. And he's not going to fight for the Greeks anymore because his trophy was taken from him. And this is where I said I was going to have a couple of Greek words I want us to know. Time, T-I-M-E, with the line across it, and kleos. And both roughly translate to something along the lines of glory. But time is the kind of glory or the kind of thing that's represented in the stuff you have. So in a modern concept, if I drive a fancy car and live in a big house and I have a swimming pool and I wear the best shoes and the best clothes, that's my time. Right? And that's important to the Greeks. They're very concerned about time. That's their treasure, right? But then the other idea of glory, there's another word that they have, kleos, K-L-E-O-S. And kleos is the kind of fame and glory that you get to take with you after you die. It's kleos is the fact that we are talking 3,000 years later about Achilles. That's kleos. That's fame and glory, right? Agamemnon, Odysseus, the fact that these names get remembered and brought up in our conversations today, that's kleos. Time only lasts as long as you're alive and then someone else gets your stuff. But your kleos, that's forever. You get to keep that forever if you can earn that kind of glory. We're going to keep coming back to these concepts and others and ideas of kleos and time. But make sure for that learning objective, you've got those two tucked away and make a note. Those will be words that will be on the future quizzes as we come along. You need to have those two words, and we'll keep adding to the list slowly as we progress through our readings. Okay. All right. All right, book one. I'm gonna stop there with book one, at least in my analysis here. I've asked you to read it though, and make sure you've read and know what happens on Mount Olympus, because it's good stuff. So the first half we get Agamemnon and Achilles on Earth. The second half of book one is about Zeus and Hera and Thetis, because Thetis is so if there's two human characters I want everyone to make sure you know who Achilles is, make sure you know who Agamemnon is, make sure you know who Odysseus is too. You're gonna have to learn that one. For now, and then we'll keep adding to those too. But three gods, make sure you know. I think everyone's heard of Zeus, right? I think everyone's probably heard of Hera. Maybe not Thetis though. Thetis, Thetis, is a more minor goddess, but that's Achilles' mother. And there's lots of great stories. I could go on and on about Thetis. She's a fascinating character in Greek myth. But the key thing to remember is she is Achilles' mother, and she goes to Zeus and she says, hey, my son was wronged. Help him get glory. And when you see that glory, I think she means kleos, K-L-E-O-S, glory, not time necessarily. Although having time leads to kleos, so they're interconnected. Anyway, all right, so read the rest of book one. I'm going to move now for my last 15 minutes down to book 3. All right, so let me jump down. I highlighted some stuff I was going to talk about, but I am running out of time. I got about 13 minutes left to talk about book 3. Okay, so book 3. So real quick, book 2. We're skipping book 2. It's not in our textbook. Book 2 is the most important part of book 2 is you get a long list of all the Greeks, the great kings who come to fight, the 1,000 ships. That come to fight, and it's a big long list, and it's a little bit tedious to read that list of ships, but in their own time, imagine this as a poem, you would have been listening because you would have known who those names were, and you were probably related to one of them, and you were waiting to hear a family name mentioned. So book 2 is good stuff, but we're gonna gloss right over it and move into book 3. Now book 3 shifts gears just a little bit, and we get to see now inside of the Trojan walls. So everything we've read about in book 1 was on the Greek side. We saw Achilles and Agamemnon and their quarrel. We went up to the Mount Olympus and we saw Zeus and Hera and their quarrel, brought about because Thetis wanted glory for her son. Now we get to see a little bit of the Trojan characters that we need to learn. And let me just, before I jump into book 3, let me give 4 names that you need to know. I've already mentioned Hector briefly. Hector is the oldest prince. Well, let me start with the king and the queen. The king is Priam, P-R-I-A-M. Make sure you know who he is, king of the Trojans. And his wife is Hecuba. Hecuba, Hecuba. And they're the king and the queen, and they have lots of kids. And we're going to talk about more of their kids later in the course, but for right now, tuck away and make sure you know Hector's their oldest, and Hector is the equivalent of Achilles on the other side. He is the best warrior that the Trojans have. And of course, if you can, just like a good blockbuster movie, when we get to books, the later books, we're going to see Hector and Achilles face off eventually. Not too much of a spoiler there, I think. But the younger son is Paris, who sometimes also has the name of Alexander or Alexander Paris. And Paris is the reason for the war, because he stole Helen. All right, so let me start off my analysis of book 3. I'm going to point out 4 different Homeric similes for us. 4 different ones. So I've highlighted them here. Here's the first. When all the warriors had been assembled, arranged in proper order with their leaders, the Trojans marched with calls and cries like birds, just like the cries of cranes across the sky when they escape torrential winter rains and fly away towards the streams of ocean and bring destruction to the pygmy people. Out of the air they strike and start the conflict. Okay? Let's see if I can highlight the rest of that too. There we go. All right. Anytime you encounter a metaphor or a simile, whether it's a Homeric simile or a metaphor in literature, you ask yourself 2 questions. What are the 2 things being compared? So in this case, the things being compared are the Trojans and their marching. And what is it being compared to? The birds and their cries. So that's the first question. Identify the 2 things being compared. Second, ask yourself, what's the significance of the comparison? Right, this is something we could talk about this at length, right? What does it mean to compare the Trojan army to the birds, right? Well, I mean, in a real quick, simple answer, a whole flock of birds, pretty terrifying. Remember, right? Birds are their ancestors are the dinosaurs, the raptors, right? And these are cranes. These are big birds too, right? They are scary. Like torrential winter rains flying towards the streams of ocean, bringing destruction, right? All right, we can keep going, and we will keep going deeper into these metaphors, but I'm just going to give just sort of a taste of these first 4. So I've highlighted a second one here. Paris Alexander, wearing a cloak of panther skin draped round his shoulders. He held a curving bow and sword and brandished 2 spears, both tipped with bronze. He stood in front and summoned all the bravest of the Greeks to fight him hand-to-hand in deadly combat. When Menelaus, friend of Ares, Ares is the god of war, also known as Mars in Roman myth, noticed Paris come striding out before the crowd, he was delighted, as a starving lion is thrilled to come upon a massive carcass, a stag or a mountain goat, and avidly begins to eat the flesh. What are the 2 things being compared? Menelaus is being compared to a lion, right? And what's the significance of the comparison? He's scary, he's strong, he's going to devour Paris the way that he is so filled with rage, anger, and the strength to carry it out. Right? All right. And with Homeric similes, you can keep going deeper. There's lots more. And actually, I said there were 4. Let's see. The third one, right at the beginning. Menelaus was thrilled to set his eyes on godlike Paris, believing he would make the culprit pay. When godlike Paris Alexander saw him appear among the foremost line of fighters, his confidence was battered, and he slunk back to his group of friends, avoiding death. As in the valleys of a mountainside when someone sees a snake and startles back. What are the 2 things being compared? Paris's reaction to seeing Menelaus is being compared to a group of friends or a hike. Think of like out on a hike, right? And you see a scary snake and you jump back. He's like that same kind of fear. Paris's fear is being compared to the fear of seeing a snake, which is a nice follow-up metaphor, Homeric simile to the one we saw above. One more, and then we'll move on. One more. Hector. It's quite reasonable for you to... and so at this point, Paris is being scolded by his older brother. And Paris says, you're right. I shouldn't be afraid of Menelaus. I should be willing to go fight him, no matter how much he's like a lion and how much I'm scared of him like you're scared of a snake. He says to his older brother, he says, Hector, it's quite reasonable for you to scold me in this way. Your heart is always tough as an axe that slices through a tree, used by a skillful man to build a ship. And we can go very deep with this one, I think. Now, what are the 2 things being compared? Hector's heart is being compared. What's it being compared to? An axe that slices through a tree. But not just any axe slicing through a tree. It's one that's going to be used to then build a ship and make something that's good and valuable, like a ship. So it's not just the violence of the axe hitting the tree. it's also more than that. It's about this is the right thing to do that Hector is showing Paris. So he agrees. Paris builds up his courage to face this lion, who he is scared of the way you'd be scared of a snake. He's ready to do it. Hector's great heart, which is like an axe, has shaped him into something better, has carved his heart into something, has given him bravery. He's ready to go fight now, like a ship is ready to go out on the ocean and sail. And we come over here. Let's read this one here, line 107. Listen now, Trojans and well-armed Greeks, to what the man who started this whole conflict has to say. This is Hector announcing that he's willing to have a duel. Let's have these two fight it out. Paris is asking all the other Trojans and all the other Greeks to set aside our splendid weapons on the earth that feeds us, while he himself fights warlike Menelaus, holding a duel in the midst of us for Helen and for all the wealth. The winner will get the wealth. That's the time, right? And take the woman home. The rest of you must sacrifice and swear a solemn oath of friendship. Okay, so I'm going to kind of rush right along. You've read what happens, right? Menelaus is favored by the god of war. Paris is favored by the goddess of love, Aphrodite. In a fight, Aphrodite's not very useful. She arguably is one of the most powerful goddess. She is a goddess who can subdue Zeus himself with her power. But on a battlefield, not so much. In a duel, not so much. That's Menelaus, and he of course is he destroys Paris in this fight. But he doesn't get to win. Because, well, we'll get there in just a minute. You've already read it. Aphrodite comes in, swoops him away, and saves him. All right, But now, just before that part, now that's in a couple of pages from where I'm at right here. I want to point out one more really important part. I said there were 4 Trojans. I want you to know: Priam the king, Hecuba the queen, Hector, the oldest prince, and Paris, the second prince, the one who stole Helen. Here's Priam. And remember, and also you need to know who Helen is. I don't know if I've said she's one of the characters you need to know, but you need to know who Helen is. And remember, Helen is in Troy behind the walls, and the king calls to her and says, "Come, dear child, and sit by me, and watch your former husband." And this is a really lovely, lovely moment. Priam is a good old man. He really is. It's hard to find fault with this old king. Sit by me and watch your former husband and family and friends and relatives. He's up on the walls watching the battle, and he says, "Helen, come look." And he says to her, "I do not blame you in the least for this. I blame the gods who roused the tears of war in conflict with the Greeks." Everybody blames Helen for the Trojan War. Even I did at the beginning of the video lecture, right? I said, what's the cause of the Trojan War? It's because of Helen, right? And you can argue and you can say, oh, it's because of Paris, and it's because of their love, it's because of their whatever that is, right? But not Priam. Priam sees above it, and he says, "I don't blame you for this." And he calls her, dear child. Right? And then he calls her and he says, "Show me who all these people are." And it's basically the same thing I did earlier in the video lecture, right? Who are the most important people? I need to know who they are, right? And she points out Agamemnon. And says he's an enormous man. Agamemnon is an enormous man. And remember, that's the one Achilles is in the quarrel with, right? And then he has him point out Odysseus. And she says, Odysseus, he knows every trick, and he can always form the wisest plan. So Agamemnon's huge, but Odysseus is smaller, but smarter. A third fighter, Ajax. And then another, she also points out Idomeneus, a more minor character. You don't need to remember his name yet. I feel bad, I shouldn't say that. He gets his own stories too. Anyway, and she also mentions 2 very minor characters. You don't need to remember these names, but she mentions her brothers, Castor and Pollux, they're not there. She points out that she doesn't know where they're at. All right, let's see. What else did I highlight here? This is the ending of where Menelaus leaps on Paris, wins the battle, but then Aphrodite snatches up Paris with greatest ease, as gods can do, and rescues him. All right, and that brings us to the end of Book 3. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed this video lecture. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you need to, you can always go back and rewatch parts of it. Next up, there is a practice quiz. Practice quiz doesn't count for points. But it does draw from the same test bank of questions that the graded quiz will have in class that you do. So do the practice quiz. You can only do it once, but do the practice quiz and make sure you've got that stuff. And also remember, when we get to the graded quiz in class, you can use any handwritten notes you took. So if you weren't taking notes during this video, you can go back and rewatch and get some notes, and handwritten notes are allowed on the graded quiz that we do in class. All right, if you have questions, send me an email. I'm happy to help as best I can. And other than that, yeah, do the practice quiz, and I will see everyone in class. And we'll start with the graded quiz, and we'll jump right into a discussion of the Iliad. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.